Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. I stared down at the freshly dug hollow pit in front of me, which had once been a grave. The mahogany casket, once occupied, now lay vacant at the bottom of the 6-foot hole. "And you didn't see anyone last night?" the officer asked me, writing something down in his notebook. I shook my head, defeated. I'm a night cemetery guard for a churchyard in the sleepy town of Orlingdale, England. Aside from shooing off the occasional group of teenagers or escorting lost mourners out of the grounds, nothing like this had ever happened at my job. I don't understand who would do this. The vicar growled behind me as the police gathered their evidence and left after promising they'd patrol the area tonight. What horrid person would steal a body? This is despicable. He put his arm on my shoulder, reassuringly. "You won't be working alone tonight," he told me. "I've called Vincent and told him what happened. He's assured me he'll be here tonight to patrol with you." I walked through the tall iron gates of the churchyard to see Vince sat on a bench, an unlit cigarette perched between his lips. He looked up at me and smiled, holding out his open pack of smokes to offer me one. "Weird fucking thing to do, you know," he muttered, flicking his lighter and raising it to his mouth. "Robbing a grave for a corpse." I nodded in agreement, taking a long drag of my cigarette. Vince was a younger man in his early 30s. He was tall and skinny, with a head of floppy blonde hair. He and I were both hired as night guards at around the same time a year ago, but we'd often be working different nights, so never really got a chance to properly talk. I exhaled a cloud of smoke. "Think they'll come back?" "Nah," Vince replied confidently. "Have to be pretty dumb to return to the scene of the crime the next day." We patrolled the grounds for hours, occasionally splitting up and linking back up to cover more ground. I began to relax as 3 a.m. rolled around, thinking Vince was probably right that they wouldn't come back. We eventually ended up stood on a small hill which overlooked most of the churchyard. The steeple towered in the distance, as if trying to intimidate anyone who entered into its yard. "Are you a religious man?" I asked Vincent, who shrugged. "Nah, not really. Are you?" I shook my head. "Then what the fuck are we doing working?" "Air." Vince laughed loudly, pulling out his pack of cigarettes. "We buried my sister here," he told me, still looking off into the distance. "We lost her in an accident, just before I started working here, actually." I looked at him and nodded understandingly. "It's a big reason I took the job," he continued. "Means every night that I'm not at home, I'm air with her." We smoked in comfortable silence for a while, finishing off our cigarettes and stubbing them out in a nearby bin. "What was her name?" I asked him. Vince looked at me, his warm blue eyes flickering with a momentary vulnerability. "Mila," he replied. "Mila Blossom Evans. She was only 19 when she died. Family ain't been the same since." "I can imagine." I comforted him. Vince opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by a loud metallic noise coming from the corner of the yard. "The fuck was that?" Vince asked in a hushed tone. We aimed our flashlights in the direction of the sound. A bush outside of the iron fence rustled hastily. "An animal?" I whispered, unable to hide the nervousness in my voice. We cautiously walked over to the disturbed shrubbery. "Look." Vince pointed. I followed his hand to see one of the iron bars of the fence hanging limply. "That must be where our grave robbers been getting in." Vince hissed. Our eyes met as the terrible realization hit us like a train. They aren't breaking in, they've just taken something out. We both turned and split up, trying to find the grave which had just been emptied. I pulled out my phone to call the police, when I heard a pained scream. I almost dropped my phone as I sprinted over to Vince, who was on his knees. "Vince!" I shouted, as I spotted him on his knees with his head to the floor. As I ran closer, I could hear his muffled sobs. I looked over to the freshly dug hole, which sat in front of him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I whispered as I walked closer to him. That's when I saw the familiar name on the headstone. The police came and went, yet again taking a statement and promising to patrol. "More should be done," I snapped, annoyed. "Why aren't detectives coming to take evidence? Why aren't Dash?" I know," the vicar said softly. "Remember, this is a small town. They're doing what they can for now. Forensics have already been, but we're such an isolated town. We just have to trust they're doing their best." "But what about Dash?" "Vincent." The old vicar finished my sentence. "I've insisted he go home and have some time off." The vicar stepped closer to me. He doesn't have any family. His sister was all he had. I can't imagine what he's feeling. I'll be joining you on watch tonight while he's away. The police have searched the perimeter and secured any openings in the fence. Nothing will get in or out without us knowing. Raised voices filled the evening atmosphere as I entered the cold iron gates of the churchyard. You should be at home resting. You've no reason to be here tonight. The vicar said sternly. She was my sister. I want to be here. I need to be here. Vince replied sharply. This isn't helping anyone. Please go home. The vicar told him. I walked up to them and cleared my throat. Ah, thank goodness you're here. The vicar gestured to me. Vincent just arrived and I've told him he should be home resting. Could you dash? No, I gotta be here to catch this prick. Vince looked at me, his voice slightly breaking. She was my fucking sister, man. A wave of sympathy washed over me as I remembered what the vicar had told me last night. I mean, we could use all the help we can get, I suggested. 3 people is better than 2. Vince turned to look at the vicar, his blue eyes filled with desperation and pleading. The vicar sighed. I'm not trying to be malicious. I'm just thinking about what's best for you. If you really want to stay, I can't force you to go. But I really think it's best if you were at home recovering emotionally. Vince nodded. I'd like to stay. What do you think you're doing? Stop that at once. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the vicar's voice in the distance and began running towards him. The vicar stood on the grass with his phone to his ear. In front of him, a short man dressed in all black stood over a grave which had been partially dug into. The man stood with his hands raised in the air and a shovel at his feet. His facial details were impossible to make out due to the black ski mask over his head. Please dash, the man pleaded in an accent I couldn't place. Now you just wait there, the police are on their way. The vicar told him sternly. I felt a rush of wind as Vince lunged past me and tackled the man. Stop it, now stop it! The old vicar yelled as Vince began throwing punches. The vicar grabbed Vince by the shoulders and attempted to pry him from the man, who had curled himself into a ball to protect himself from the blows. I grabbed Vince's other shoulder, and we managed to pull him off his prey. During the scuffle, Vince had unmasked the grave robber. He looked to be in his 40s, with short dark hair and brown eyes. He was sweating heavily. Please, the man begged. What's your name? The vicar wanted to know. Andres, the man responded nervously. Andres Rivera. And what are you doing in my churchyard every night digging up the deceased? The vicar demanded. Please, Andres repeated. It will kill me. What are you talking about? Andres took a breath, still sitting on the floor with his legs to his chest. It followed me over here. I fled from the Philippines. It followed. Who followed you? The vicar asked, looking confused. It smelled the death on me, Andres continued. I have an illness not long left. Andres noticeably shuddered, clutching his legs closer to his chest like a scared toddler. I ran away, but it came after me. It found me. I feed it to keep it away. Please, it will kill me. I don't understand, the vicar spoke up. What's come after you? Andres looked up at him, his eyes wide. Ball. I beg your pardon? The vicar asked, leaning closer to the terrified Andres. Ball, Andres repeated, a tremble in his voice. In my hometown in the Philippines, we were told stories as children about the creature that steals corpses and stalks the dying. I thought it was just stories, but then I got ill. I heard it every night on my roof. I smelled its putrid rotten odor. I saw its evil face at my window waiting for me to die so it can dash. Andres was abruptly cut off by Vince. This is bullshit, Vince snapped. Why are we listening to this weirdo's bollocks story? He's obviously fucking insane and eating corpses. No. Andres shook his head violently. I wouldn't. I only took what was necessary. Yeah, you took my fucking sister. Vince spat, a malicious look in his eyes. There's a lot of empty graves here I could fill. No, please. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Please don't. I'm sorry. I held my arm up to block Vince, who looked like he wanted to resume his attack on the sniveling Andres. You don't understand what it's like. Andres yelled with a broken voice. I have my final months in fear of this creature. I will not know peace. Now calm down. The vicar instructed. The police are pulling up now. Vincent, go and unlock the gate. Police, no. No. Andres shouted desperately. I need to feed it. I can't dash. That's enough now, please, the vicar said assertively. You're clearly unwell. I hope you get the care you need. The 3 of us stood back and watched Andres be led away in handcuffs, his cries and pleas falling on deaf ears. I woke up feeling a sense of accomplishment. There was a spring in my step as I flicked my bread into the toaster and poured a cup of coffee. I practically skipped to work that day, relieved that this shift will be as uneventful and mind-numbingly boring as it was before. Vince volunteered to work with me tonight, ignoring the vicar's advice to take some time away. The hours practically flew by as we trudged up and down the gravelly paths. And then I smelled it, a putrid smell, as if I'd walked into a tomb of 100 rotting bodies. What the fuck? I choked, covering my nose. Vince shone his flashlight around. What's that smell? I'm gonna puke. He spat, clasping his hand over his mouth. A shadow briefly covered the moon. What was that? I asked, looking up into the crisp night sky for anything out of the ordinary. Up there. Vince pointed to a dark figure balanced on the tiles of the steeple. What the fuck? Who's that? I whispered. It's fucking Andres, Vince snapped. I'm gonna kill him. I don't think Andres could get up there, I said, the nervousness I'd been pushing down escaping into my voice. I don't think anyone could get up there. Vince's face turned from fury to fear as he realized what I was saying. Before either of us could say another word, the figure quickly scaled down the steeple roof with a natural ease no human could manage. As it reached the roof of the church building, it extended its long arms and glided out of sight. I looked at Vince. His face was pale, and his wide eyes remained locked on where the creature had gone. We need to leave, I whispered, terrified. Our only way out is past where that thing went. Vince replied, his voice haunting and hollow. I cursed when I remembered the opening in the fence that Andres had used, which had now been sealed off. I say we run for it, Vince whispered. Don't look back, just run to the gate. What? No way, I hissed. Then what? You want to wait in here with this fucking thing? Vince hissed back. Call the police, I told Vince. They'll help us. Vince went quiet for a moment before confessing. I never take my phone to work. No point, who am I gonna message? Only person I had that meant anything's gone. I got you, but I'd feel like a twat messaging you on your nights off. I frantically dug my phone from my pocket, my hand shaking so hard I could barely type in my passcode. The loud sound of a branch breaking behind us propelled us into fight or flight, Vince grabbing my sleeve and pulling me, causing me to drop my phone as we fled. We ducked behind a large headstone in the middle of the yard, gasping for breath. Vince, I dropped the phone. I whispered, frantic. Ah, fuck. It's okay. Vince tried to calm me, although I could hear the masked desperation in his voice. Can you see it? I asked him, too scared to move from the false safety of our limestone cover. I'll check. Vince slowly and silently rose onto his knees, building up the courage to peer around the grave. I felt my stomach tighten suddenly. I tried to force myself to take a deep breath, but it felt as though my abdomen were in a vice. I reached down to clasp the pressure in my side, when my hand met something wet, cold and unfamiliar. I looked down. Gripping my thick winter coat was a gray, slimy, bony clawed hand. Vince! I screamed, frantically squirming out of the creature's clutch. Vince looked over at me, before looking back and becoming face to face with the putrid creature. It then stood upright and towered over us as we began desperately crawling backwards. It was tall with dark crimson eyes, yellow rotten teeth, and a disgustingly long tongue which seemed to lap hungrily at its chest. Its skin was a horrible greenish gray, and its arms were connected to its entire torso by a tight flap of skin, similar to a bat. Its limbs looked almost human, with 5 long, sickly fingers all accompanied by filthy, bloodied claws. And the smell. The creature smelled like the pinnacle of decomposition, its hot breath filling our lungs with the unescapable stench of death. Vince grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Come on! He pulled me along as we weaved in between headstones. Tears clouded my vision, and my trousers felt cold and heavy where I had unknowingly lost control of my bladder. Vince suddenly tripped, sending us both hurtling forwards mid-sprint. I fell hard onto the gravelly floor, feeling a burning pain in my hand, which had been scraped under my body weight. Vince, I whispered, groggily pulling myself up and turning to look at him. We have to Kadash. My heart dropped when I saw Vince, lying motionless on the grass next to a hollow grave, a large wound across his head. I looked at the bloodied headstone beside him. Mila Blossom Evans, forever 19. Beloved sister and friend. A short life lived to the fullest. Vince. My voice quaked as I crouched over him and shook his lifeless body. Vince? Vince, please. I begged him, but Vince never got up, the empty look in his glassy blue eyes telling me his soul had left. I wiped my tear-soaked cheek with my sleeve and began hurriedly backing away as the creature slowly, began to crawl along the gravel path towards Vance's body. No! I mustered as it cocooned his carcass with its fleshy wings. No. The creature plunged its salivating tongue into Vince's eye socket, not even looking at me. I froze, sheer terror forbidding me from vomiting with disgust. The creature's sharp claws tore the clothes from Vince's body effortlessly as it began to rip away at his flesh. I backed up in horror until I felt a familiar stone wall behind me. The church. I looked to the left to see the tall iron gates willing me towards them. I took one last look back at the creature. It locked eyes with me, as its long tongue was preoccupied consuming Vance's body. It had a look of hatred in its eyes, as if it despised me for still living. I turned towards the gate and fled, not even stopping to unlock the heavy padlock. I gripped the iron bars tightly, forcing my foot on top of the bolts of the gate as I clambered up. I threw my leg over and collapsed from the top of the gate, landing hard on my feet. Ignoring the pain in my ankles, I desperately sprinted to the closest house I could find, the vicar's. I must have ran for about 20 minutes without stopping, practically kicking the vicar's garden gate off its hinges as I pounded on his door. A face peeked at me from the window, before a startled vicar opened the door in his pajamas. "What's happened? Are you okay? What's going on?" he asked, panicked. Everything began spinning as I collapsed into his front door as he tried to catch me. I woke up the next afternoon in a hospital bed. After having myself discharged, I used the hospital phone to call a taxi to the vicar's house. I knocked on his door, less frantic this time. He opened the door in a pair of blue jeans and a relaxed cardigan, looking surprised to see me. "Oh, you're out already? You should have called. Come in." We sat in his living room, and I told him everything that had happened that night. "Yes, I'm sorry to hear about Vincent. I know he was fond of you. You were a friend to him." The vicar sympathized. "Would you mind sitting with me while I recount all this to the police?" I asked him. "I'm worried I'll forget some of the details I told you." "Oh, I don't think we need to tell them any of that." The vicar shook his head. "Andres was let out on bail last night. Let's just say he came back and did all of this." My mouth fell open. What do you mean?" I asked him. The vicar shrugged. "Well, I don't think the town needs to hear about this demonic being." The vicar leaned forward in his chair. "Can you imagine what this will do to my church if the members hear a satanic creature taunts the churchyard? It will destroy their faith." My eyes widened. The vicar's expression softened. "Relax," he said calmly. "I'm not making a threat. I'll make a deal. You keep quiet about this, and I'll pay you for helping me." "But what about the dash?" I began. "The demon? It will lose interest and go elsewhere. Andres said it's following him. Chances are it will go back to where it came from once it has him. It doesn't seem to be able to dig the graves up by itself here." I looked at him anxious. "I've always been good to you. I gave you and Vincent jobs when nobody else would. The money I'll transfer to you, we'll call it compensation for what you had to go through at my church. Pretend it's money for therapy or whatnot. Then you can finally get yourself a little place in the city, like you've always talked about. All I need is for you to let me do the talking." I gazed out my window, the vibrant life of the city radiating through my apartment. I left my home in Orlingdale that same week, choosing to remain quiet and let the vicar tell the authorities whatever story he could come up with. The vicar sent me a letter last week. It was brief, with no mention of the incident at all. He mentioned Andres had sadly passed away recently. I looked him up online to see if there were any details about him, and found a small news article from the town's local paper. It reported that Andres' body was being flown back to his hometown by his family, and nothing more. I stuffed the letter into my desk drawer, having no desire to respond. It's been 3 months since the incident, and nobody's reported seeing the creature since. Maybe it went back to the Philippines with Andres, maybe it stuck around, maybe it moved on to a different country altogether. I don't know. I hope I never know. Hi Reddit. This is a post I never thought I'd make. 2 years ago, when I graduated from that godforsaken place, I decided to put all of it behind me. My stress and anxiety and depression, all those unfortunate events that to this day plague my dreams, and regrettably, I must admit, my friends as well. I'd always intended to keep in touch with the friends I made at my high school, but that last year, well, it changed us. Really, that's the easiest way to put it. Have you heard of the International Baccalaureate? It's been around for a while, but when I first enrolled in the IB program at my high school, I knew fuck all about it. Let me give you a simple rundown. It's a diploma program designed for students in their last 2 years of high school, on par with the Cambridge, A-levels, or the junior and senior years of high school in the US. In the IB, you take 3 subjects at a higher level, similar to AP subjects with transferable credits, and another 3 at standard level. In each subject you attempt coursework and exams that eventually give you a point from a scale of 1 to 7. So that's a maximum of 42 points you can get from your subjects alone. Then you've got 2 more components, TOK, a philosophy-like subject, and a 4,000-word extended essay, a professional research paper that you write on a subject of your choice. Obtaining an A grade in both components gives you an additional 3 points. An A and AB gives you 3 points too, 2 Bs give you 2 points, and 2 Cs give you 1 point. The maximum points you can get in the IB program is 45. 45. I'm not usually a melodramatic person, but that number truly means something else to me after those 2 years in hell. But let's go back a bit. When I first embarked on my IB journey, I was an excited, fresh-faced student. I had just finished secondary school, and on my teacher's recommendations, I'd applied for a scholarship at this particularly prestigious Chinese boarding school in a small Asian country that I will not name. Just to clear things up, I myself am Asian. After a ridiculously rigorous admissions process that combined 3 interviews with written entrance tests in all 3 sciences and advanced math, I was granted a full scholarship that included both tuition and boarding. To my lower middle class parents, it was a dream come true. And I was ecstatic, of course. I was only 16, and I was going to get to live away from my parents in this new country, this new place, surrounded by people who thought like me, people who believed in hard work and commitment just as much as I did. I don't remember feeling the slightest inkling of sadness when I left my parents behind at the airport and got on a plane to my new life. I feel a curious sort of pity for the person I once was. I'd thought that I was ready, boy was I wrong. To be fair, the first few months went by with little to no hassles. That's the thing about stress, it creeps up on you slowly. And I was even more at a disadvantage in that I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. As excited as I had been, I didn't do my homework. I'd neglected to read up on the many demands of the IB program, and I'd neglected to assess my ability to meet them. Maybe if I'd had that kind of foresight, I wouldn't be ridden with nightmares that still haunt me 2 years later. Halfway through my first year at the boarding school, I woke up one morning to find myself drastically behind on coursework, the demands of which I didn't even fully understand. Despite having studied all 3 sciences in secondary school, I still am, a humanities-inclined person, but the conditions of my scholarship required me to take 2 sciences at higher level instead of the humanities I so wanted to study. I'd initially thought that wouldn't be a problem, until I found out that I'd have to design and carry out an experiment for each of my sciences, and write a research paper based on those experiments. On top of it all, being a scholar, I was expected to get a 7 in each of my subjects, an A in both TOK and my extended essay. I was expected to get a perfect 45 out of 45. It probably doesn't sound that daunting, until you remember that I was 16, and at any given point in time more likely to pen down a poem than look up scholarly articles and learn how the Harvard referencing system works. I'm afraid I haven't even gotten to the true horrors of my story, but in order to understand the level of stress that my friends and I were at, it's important to understand the many, many things that were expected of us. My friends, the people that I ate every meal with, shared almost every class with, the people I studied with and stood by, and eventually cut off all contact with, they consisted of my roommate and about 7 boys. We were a tight group, the 9 of us, did everything together. We had all come from different countries, and they taught me a lot of things, life lessons that to this day I carry with me. You've got to understand that in my time spent in that hellish place, this band of people were what kept me sane. We looked out for each other, made sure the stress didn't get to us, made sure none of us got too close to the edge. There were many people who tipped over, was the thing. My teachers were relentless, and believed that setting ridiculous and highly unrealistic deadlines for coursework submissions was the most effective way to motivate us. Those of us who could handle it, handled it. Those of us who couldn't, cracked. In the 4th month of our first year, we had our first attempted suicide. It was a Chinese girl from my cluster who'd fallen back on one too many deadlines, enough to earn her a meeting with the principal and a tentative suspension. She overdosed on sleeping pills and left a note beside her bed. Her roommate found her, rushed her to the hospital, and got her stomach pumped just in time. That was just the first of many. We had 3 more attempted suicides in that first year, and once each of them got out of the hospital, they were punished for their attempts. Detention, caning, exile from the student hub, where we had our sports hall and music rooms. They cracked down on those of us who tried to escape. I remember this one day in November. I was sat on the floor outside my room and on the phone with my mum, and I just broke down. There was a distinct feeling of hopelessness inside me that I can still remember if I shut my eyes and concentrate hard enough. My excitement and hope had been replaced with fear, sadness, and a clear knowledge that there was no way but through it. But I've got to tell you, I almost didn't make it through. All of us were stressed. Some of us were depressed. But Rui, she was okay. Rui was a Filipino-Chinese scholar who I didn't really associate with. She was, intense isn't really the word. She was a jovial kid, friendly enough. There was something crazy in her eyes maybe, but honestly, there was something crazy in all of us. It just stood out in her more, I guess. She didn't have any friends that I can recall. The thing about her was that she was competitive. We were all encouraged to be competitive, but she always took it one step ahead. We were in the same form class, although we didn't share any classes besides. And she'd always stand second. I'd always stand first. After our first term, when our class rankings were revealed, I remember the way she congratulated me. With a firm handshake, a half smirk, that crazy glint in her eyes seemingly magnified. There was something in her demeanor, something that screamed, "I'm coming for you," even if she wouldn't say it out loud. Or maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe I'm only saying this because I know what I know now. The terrible, terrible things that, well, the first attempted suicide happened the next month. And to be honest, I had more things to worry about than an overly competitive peer. Rui was a female boarder as well, so she lived on my floor, and I happened to run into her often on my way to and from the water dispensers. I can still remember that sight, her in her pajamas, carrying a steaming mug of something away from the water dispenser as I walked in the opposite direction. She'd half smirk at me, and I'd smile back. We'd maybe exchange a hi or a hello, but rarely anything more. I learnt from my roommate, who made it her mission to learn everything she could about every girl on the floor, that Rui indulged in traditional medicine. A more accurate term would be that she was obsessed with it. For the first quarter of the year, she was making herbal chicken in an electric cooker and drinking herbal tea every morning that left a stale smell in the common rooms. Then she switched to several neem concoctions, creams that she would apply on her face and back, leaves that she would crush and make into tea with honey and ginger. I can't remember what else she dabbled in. All those old wives' tales that were supposed to enhance your memory, do good things to your brain. She'd carry her mugs and plates around us with an air of superiority, and my roommate amused herself by dropping a choice number of curses behind her back. I remember distinctly this one week when she cooked a whole baby pig and ate the entire thing. It's something that the Chinese pride themselves on, being able to prepare and consume every part of the pig. On Wednesday, I came out of my room to find her sitting on the sofa and eating a bowl of pig's brain, apparently uncooked. The traditions in themselves were intriguing, but I stayed away from Rui. And Lord, am I glad I did. In that first year, the stress manifested itself in the most obvious way possible, the attempted suicides. The second year wasn't so black and white. As seniors, the expectations from us had risen. Final submissions for different research papers were due every month, and even our weekends didn't feel like weekends. I remember a week where I slept maybe 6 hours in total. I was so busy. Some of my friends didn't even take that time off to sleep. It was a bad time for all of us. People began to disappear around then. It sounds more sinister than it was, but maybe not sinister enough in hindsight. First, it was a girl who lived in the room at the other end of the floor, Rui's roommate. She went home to China during the March holidays and didn't come back. After she was absent from classes for longer than a week, rumors began to sprout, the most prevailing one being that she finally cracked and convinced her parents to withdraw her from that hellish school. Then we stopped thinking of her with worry and switched over to envy. She was a bright kid, she'd flourish elsewhere. Then it was a boy, a roommate of one of my friends. He was clever too, and we remembered him with envy. By the time the third person disappeared, in the middle of June, at the crux of our mid-year exams, we began to grow suspicious. My guy friends warned me to be careful, not to go out in the evenings on my own, or to eat anything that the girls on my floor gave me. It sounds ridiculous now, but the atmosphere was getting more and more competitive, and my teachers refused to acknowledge or discuss these disappearances, almost like they weren't happening at all. It was a confusing, scary time. I remember considering, on more than one occasion, withdrawing from the school myself. But my scholarship was airtight. Had I chosen to withdraw, my parents would have to pay the full sum of tuition and boarding that had been previously waived. And we just weren't made of that kind of money. So I stayed. When Mr. Sim was fired, we began to worry for real. Mr. Sim was one of the only mentors in the boarding school who actually seemed human. He was the unofficial 10th member of my group of friends. He looked out for the 9 of us, worried with us when our peers attempted to kill ourselves, and begged us not to ever think of doing the same. He'd do grocery runs for us during exam season, would help us organize notes when we were too worn out. We would have survived without him, sure, but what a struggle it would have been. He left without telling any of us. When we asked the other mentors, we were told not to poke our nose in business that wasn't ours. One of the boys who had his number called him up, and he told us with his own damn voice not to try and contact him again. He sounded shaken, my friend reported. We didn't attempt to talk to him again, and it felt a bit like one of us had attempted suicide and succeeded this time. As you can probably tell, those were bleak times. 5 girls from my cluster, by then, were missing. All the smart ones gone. And 3 boys, if I remember correctly. The only good thing that came out of that period was that Rue stopped making her stinky herbal teas, and the common rooms were once again suitable to study in. Then came our final deadline in research paper submissions, and then our finals, and then graduation, and then home. Home at last. I expected to feel relief after I left that school for good, but all I felt was emptiness. I was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety a week before Christmas, and that sent my parents into a frenzy, claiming that they didn't know it had been that bad for me. I withdrew into myself, stopped talking as much as I used to, spent most of my time in my room. IB had beaten the fight out of me. When my friends texted me, I didn't respond. The memories associated with them had become painful and distorted. I was convinced I would never be the same again. The 2 years that followed passed much in the same way. I'm at university now, and I live in the same town as my parents, although in a flat of my own. I don't have a roommate. I work part-time in the kitchen of a bakery, and I throw myself into uni work. Sometimes I can go days without talking to anyone. Except for yesterday. Yesterday, Mr. Sim sent me a friend request on Facebook. Yesterday, I convinced him to allow me to call him on Skype. Yesterday, he told me the truth. Mr. Sim had been one of the welfare mentors in the boarding. The welfare mentors were responsible for visiting our floors regularly, to check on hygiene and make sure that everything generally was all right. That last year, the mentor assigned to our floor was newly appointed and apparently unclear on her tasks. They found out well into our last year at the school that she hadn't been making her rounds of our floors at all. She was reprimanded, and Mr. Sim was assigned to check out our floor instead. I remember that day. I remember coming out to get water from the dispenser and finding him on our floor, waving at him and asking him what he was doing there. He'd said he was just checking up on us. I'd found it odd, maybe, or maybe I didn't find it odd at all. My perception of strangeness and normality had become warped by then. It's completely possible I didn't question it at all. But the smell. How did I not question the smell? It had begun to smell bad around the water dispensers so long ago. It crept up on me, like the stress. So I didn't notice it until Mr. Sim took in a lungful of air and asked me with a pained expression if it always smelt like that on this end of the floor. I'd shrugged, maybe blamed it on the dampness that came with the recent rains. I'd filled up my mug with hot water and went back to my room on the other end. Mr. Sim had one more room to check, Rue's room. He knocked once and didn't get a response. He twisted the knob, opened the door carefully, identifying himself and asking if he could enter. She wasn't in the room. The room was empty. Well, it wasn't empty. He told me yesterday that the first thing that hit him was the smell. It smelt, he told me, like decay, like death. He'd groped blindly for the light switch, turned it on. For a full minute, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Later, after he'd thrown up 3 times and was shaking so badly he could barely stand, his terrified brain told him he was looking at 8 bodies. 8 dead bodies with the skulls cracked open and the brains pulled out. There was blood everywhere. There was blood everywhere. He repeated it over and over again yesterday, his voice shaking. I nodded numbly. I believed him. It was fucked up, and nothing like I could ever have imagined, but I believed him. Those 8 students hadn't disappeared. Rue had killed them, and she'd eaten their brains. She ran out of traditional medicine to try, and pigs' brains weren't working for her. So she tried human ones. Mr. Sims says he doesn't remember exactly what he did after that. He remembers locking the door behind him and going immediately to the principal. He remembers being fired on the spot and being so shocked and appalled that he left at once, without a word to any of us. I don't know what any of it means, if our principal and our teachers and the rest of the mentors were aware, or if they didn't want to stop her purely out of curiosity. Maybe they just wanted her to get that 45 and were willing to tolerate any means that would help her reach that end. I don't know how much they paid Mr. Sim, but it must have been a lot to convince him not to reach out to any of us until 2 years later. They must have paid the parents of those poor children even more. But I can't even begin to comprehend any of this, which is why I'm typing it out and posting it here. Maybe if I try hard enough, I can pretend that none of this happened, that it's just a story I'm narrating for karma. I haven't tried to contact any of my friends yet. Maybe I will after I post this. Mr. Sim has already said he doesn't want to relive his story again, although he wouldn't mind me telling my friends if I wanted to. But do I really want to? Do I want to relive that horrible year that has somehow become even more horrific 2 years later? One last thing. I suppose you would be curious about this, so I might as well add it in. For what it's worth, I ended up getting a 44 in IB. Ruei got her 45. I started Wacky Reddit just because I thought it might make some money. I've seen a lot of YouTube channels out there reading Reddit posts, and they seem to be doing pretty well, so why the hell wouldn't I get into it? Reddit is literally just free content. You can just grab whatever you find on there. Nobody gives a shit. I started off with memes and some text posts, and those did alright. I built up a nice little group of subscribers over the next year or so, got monetized, and started making some easy money. I basically just needed to copy and paste some text into a TDS reader, and I was good to go. I was able to put out a couple of videos a day, and there was always more content to make the next one. I only started posting the stuff on No Sleep because I saw one of the other channels, Social Cores, was doing it. He'd been running his channel for a few years at that point and gotten mad subs. His No Sleep videos always got pretty good views, and people seemed to like them. So I figured, why the hell not get in on the action? I checked out the subreddit, grabbed a couple of the popular posts from the last few days, and had my video. Now, I was hoping it would get some views, but I didn't actually expect it to blow up the way it did. Seriously, my subs went through the roof. With a reception that good, I knew that I just had to give folks a little bit more. And that's where things got complicated. I'd been posting No Sleep videos for about a month or so when people started reaching out to me. The first one was this dude called Grand_Theft_Motto. He sent me a message about how I'd violated his copyright by posting his story. Seriously? Copyright? What copyright? He posted it on Reddit for free. I told him that he should be thanking me for the exposure. I mean, who did this guy think he was? An actual author? He said he was going to hit me with a copyright strike, so I told him to go fuck himself. Then I got a copyright strike. What an asshole. He wasn't the only one who started harassing me, just because I was making money off their free shit. There were a few others too. Apparently, there's a whole group of them who police people who are stealing their stories. After they put up a post calling me out for theft, I got a bunch of emails from a few different people like Not Necessarily and Ren Writer about removing the stories of theirs that I'd put up. Naturally, I blocked them. About a day or so later, another asshole named Head of Spectre went into my fucking Discord server to start some shit. I DM'd him telling him that he should feel grateful that I even decided to post his shit. That fucker literally ends every goddamn sentence with, "And it's so distracting." He decided to be immature about it and argue with me about copyright as if that applies to stuff they post for free. I didn't have the energy for that kind of negativity, so I just blocked him. Honestly, I was thinking about blacklisting these clowns from my account and not giving them any more free exposure. But I got more of a kick out of watching them cry just because they didn't like me stealing their free stuff. I did try and play ball with these guys at one point and made a subreddit so they could post the stuff they were okay with me narrating, as long as it was exclusive, but none of them actually joined, so whatever. Can't say I didn't try. Over the next couple of months, I'd get the occasional email or copyright claim, but they weren't that distracting. I was able to dodge some of them, figuring that sooner or later these guys would just get tired of it, and I was sorta right. The last email I got came from Grand_Theft_Motto came in a couple of weeks ago, and it just said this. "Hey Riley, we've tried talking this out with you. We've tried DMCAing you, and you still don't seem to understand why what you're doing is a problem. We're all getting a little tired of it. You're not just stealing works of fiction. These are pieces of people's lives, and if you're going to put it up on display, they deserve to be compensated for what they've been through. I'm not really the kind of guy who threatens people, but you forced our hand here. We wrote this one just for you guys. I don't know what's going to happen next, but good luck. I just rolled my eyes when I read it, before blocking him. If he wanted to make some cryptic threats, he was welcome to do it. It wasn't going to bother me any more than his, and his buddies' other antics had. I was the one making the money here, so they could just seethe and cope. I didn't hear from any of them after that. The copyright strikes stopped, nobody crashed my Discord, and nobody else emailed me. From what I heard, they'd also stopped harassing some of the other guys narrating their stuff too. I figured they'd finally just accepted that as long as they were posting free content, people were going to use it. I kept working on my channel, posting 2 videos a day, and I started working on a compilation to post as an ebook too. I took a bunch of the stories from my top performing videos and put them in a Google Doc so I could sorta edit them together. It was around that time when I noticed a weird video on my channel. As I said, I was posting 2 videos per day, at least one of which was usually a no-sleep video. So when I noticed a third post up on my channel, it was a little suspicious. It was 2 hours old by the time I found it, entitled Eddie and the Skittering Man. I'd wondered if maybe I'd fucked up my cue at first, but looking at the video that had gone live, I didn't recognize the title. I do actually read the stuff I post, just to make sure it's quality. This didn't sound like anything I'd seen lately. I even checked the No Sleep subreddit, just to see if I could find it there. Nothing. I finally just decided to bite the bullet and listen to it, hoping maybe that hearing the actual story would refresh my memory. It didn't. The story was about some dude named Eddie chilling around his house before hearing a noise in his closet. He'd thought it was his clothes falling off the hanger, so went to check and put them back up when he got attacked by what I presume was the Skittering Man. Eddie had tried to run, but it had followed him, crawling through his house in pursuit until he'd tripped, trying to get down the stairs. The last lines described the way Eddie looked up at it, screaming as the Skittering Man descended on him and began to feed. I wouldn't have posted this story. For starters, it was pretty short. The whole story was only around 6 minutes long. It didn't seem like it would have fit on No Sleep either. But it obviously looked like one of my videos. It had my intro card. It sounded like it used the same software I used. And the image it used as a background looked like one of the stock images I usually use for these videos. Christ, had someone hacked my account? No, that couldn't be it. Why the hell would anyone do that just to post something that just looked like something I'd post normally? That was one hell of a weird flex. I checked my login history, but I didn't really see anything out of the ordinary. I still changed my password and everything just to be safe. I posted the video on my Discord server just to see if anyone knew anything. I added, I don't even remember making this, lol, to try and save a little bit of face. I didn't expect it to get that much of a reaction, but within the next few minutes, people were posting things like, WTF man, that isn't funny, and have some respect for Eddie. What's wrong with you? Eddie? The guy from the story? What the hell? Who the fuck was Eddie? So I asked my server about it, and look, I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but the response I got sent a chill through me. Social Core, you didn't see it on his Twitter? Someone posted this morning. He's dead. Dead. Social Core was fucking dead? I thought they were joking at first, but who in their right mind would joke about something like that? But I checked his Twitter and sure enough, someone had made a post. Hey guys, Rypanda here. If you're part of the community, you'll know me. We found out this morning that Eddie Wright, the guy behind Social Core, passed away last night. Me and Eddie's friends are heartbroken beyond words right now. Eddie was a good friend, and his hard work brightened everyone's lives. Our hearts go out to his family and girlfriend right now, and we all mourn with them. Rest in peace, Eddie. You will be missed. What the fuck? What the actual fuck? Reading over the post again, I found myself struggling to actually comprehend it. I read over the text again and again in quiet disbelief as I tried to process it. Then, I started skimming through the comments. Most of them were just people offering their support and talking about how much they'd miss him. Most of them, with one exception. Head of Spectre had simply replied, everything comes at a price. I logged off of Twitter after that. Look, I don't get freaked out easily, but this freaked me the fuck out. I've played up the angle of being genuinely afraid of these stories in my Discord and in my videos, but I don't believe that they're actually real. So I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe this was all just an exceptionally shitty prank, and one of those guys on the subreddit had hacked me and posted that story about Eddie just to fuck with people. Sure, it still sounded a little crazy, but it at least made sense, and I couldn't really think up a better explanation. It sure as hell wasn't this skittering man that had been in the story. Hell, I was willing to bet that Social Core had even died in a completely different way to what they wrote. Yeah, of course he had. They were just capitalizing on his death because they'd been all pissy about that copyright bullshit. It made sense. So that's why I ended up reaching out to Panda over Discord. Not because I was freaked out or anything, just to prove that the story they'd posted was completely bogus. When I reached out, I told Panda that I was sorry to hear about what had happened to Social Core, and that he'd been an inspiration and all that. We talked for a bit, reminiscing before I asked the big question. So what happened to Eddie anyways? Was there an accident or something? Honestly, I felt a little bad prying like that, but I still had to know. Panda had stopped typing for a bit, and for a moment, I got worried that he'd just dip out of the conversation. Then after a few minutes, he posted, "I don't know. They found him at the bottom of the stairs in his home, but it wasn't the fall that did it. Someone did it to him. Fuck me, my blood ran ice cold. They'd found him murdered at the bottom of the stairs, just like in that story." Panda was typing something else, but I didn't want to read it. I needed to sit down, I needed to digest this. Logically, I knew that there had to be a rational explanation for all of this still. Maybe one of them knew what had happened to him. Or shit, what if one of them had done this? No, that was crazy. Then again, so was the idea of someone murdering Social Core in his own goddamn home. And it was less crazy than the thought that some supernatural entity had done it. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about Social. Eddie. The more I thought about those guys on the no sleep subreddit killing him, the more I started to wonder if it was even possible. And I started feeling not quite as safe. After about 2 hours of lying awake, I ended up grabbing my phone and opening up Eddie's channel. I skimmed through some of his most recent videos. The last 4 looked pretty normal. One of them was from No Sleep, the other was from a different subreddit. Looking at their timestamps though, half of them had been posted that day, probably after he'd died. I looked at the title of the next video, Brian and the Skittering Man. My stomach turned. I checked the subreddit. There was no sign of any story by that name. Sure, maybe he'd gotten it from someplace else, but still. I clicked on the story to listen, but didn't have the stomach to make it all the way through. From what little I heard, it wasn't all that different from the Eddie story. I started doing some research, trying to see if I could find out who Brian was. I pinged my Discord about if they knew anyone by that name. Sure enough, they did. Worse still, I'd heard of him. He went by Mad Reddit, and did TDS videos like Eddie and I had done. Apparently, he'd been found dead in his garage a couple of days back. I checked out his channel. It didn't take me long to find the video. Jacob and the Skittering Man. Another one. This wasn't a fucking coincidence. I considered trying to call the cops. But honestly, I wasn't sure what the hell they'd even do. There wasn't exactly any solid proof that all of these were connected. Nothing they'd accept, anyways. I clicked off of YouTube and sat for a bit, before wandering around the house trying to distract myself. When that didn't work, I did what I usually did to keep my mind occupied. I scoured Reddit looking for some shit to make a video on. I stayed off No Sleep and stuck to some true stories. I went with some of those sexy confession threads. The comments there are usually decent, and the promise of some candid secrets a stranger probably made up got me some good views. I'd grabbed a bunch of comments that looked good and was starting to run them through my software when I noticed something was off though. The words the program was saying didn't match what I'd put in. I'd put in some story about how a guy had been sleeping with his wife's sister for the past 15 years, and what came out was narration about me. It said my name. It talked about how I was seated at my desk, about how I couldn't sleep, and about the bags under my eyes. And as the software spoke, I felt my heart start to beat faster and faster. I tried to close it out, shut it up, but the program didn't close. It just kept talking before trailing off into silence for a moment. And then it fucking laughed. Ha 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 ha. I've never heard a goddamn TDS program laugh before, and I sure as hell didn't expect it to laugh the way it did. It wasn't as robotic as it should have been. The laughter was more fluid. It sounded almost like a real person. I listened to it and felt a chill run down my spine. When it finally stopped, it said 2 more words before the monitor went dark. He's here. I stared at the blank screen. My power was fine. The lights were still on in my office. I looked at my computer and saw it was still on. I could hear the fan turning. And I could hear something else too. Something deeper in the house. A low, whispering noise. The sound of countless legs skittering across the floor in my hall, and a low, almost insectoid clicking noise. I could hear my pulse racing in my ears, but it didn't drown out that sound. No, the sound just got louder. I looked back towards my office door. The hall outside was dark, but I could see the light from one of my bedroom lamps in the doorway at the other end of the hall. If there was something out there, I should have seen it. But I couldn't see anything, and the sound was still just getting louder. I remained still, rooted to the spot with terror. My hands were shaking as I stared out at the small rectangle of light at the end of my hall. And I finally saw a shadow move in front of it, a dark shape that didn't in any way resemble a man. I don't know what the fuck it was. The shape seemed to change the longer I looked at it. It didn't seem to have any fixed form. But despite that, I knew it was coming closer. And it was moving faster. My brain finally started functioning again. My body started to move. I ran to my nearest window and threw it open. The next thing I knew, I was falling, and the cold grass of my yard didn't do a hell of a lot to cushion my fall. I was pretty sure I was still alive at least. I picked myself up and looked back up at the window. I could see the shape there, watching me. It lingered for a moment before I saw it moving to follow me out the window. I didn't stick around to watch and see how it landed. I just started running, and I haven't fucking stopped since. Right now, I'm in a shitty 24-hour diner. I've called the police, but I'm not going back to that house. Not until I know it's safe. I don't know if I want to stay in a hotel either. I don't think that's going to stop it from coming after me again. I've reached out to some of the guys who were emailing before. Grand_theft_motto, Ren Writer, not_necessarily, Head of Spectre, and a few others. I don't know what I'm going to say to them, but maybe I can make a deal. Maybe I can get them to call this fucking thing off. I'll do whatever they want. I'll stop the videos, I'll delete my channel. Hell, I'll let them post what I've written here. They can claim all the fucking glory for it. I like a good ghost story. When I was younger, there were these series of books called Haunted Philippines and True Philippine Ghost Stories that contained ghost stories and paranormal experiences from various people across the country. Some stories were in English, while the rest were in Tagalog. They were quick to read and had numerous volumes. Sometimes they even had a section of ghost pictures near the end. You know the kind, nonchalant landscape or family pics with a blurry figure circled in red. Some of them actually looked convincing and downright creepy. I loved that series, though I should have enjoyed them while they lasted. As of last year, they seem to have been discontinued and are difficult to find in bookstores now. To me, these books were just good entertainment. Growing up in the Philippines provided no shortage of ghost stories and mythical legends. It seemed like everyone had a story to tell or knew someone who had one. I've had a handful of relatives in my family who claim to have had encounters with a ghost, or multo, as we called them in our native tongue. I never thought I'd have my own stories to share, but that quickly changed very recently. My family and I had recently taken a trip back to the Philippines. It was long overdue, as I had not seen my relatives and my home country in several years. It was a bit strange to see all my younger cousins grown up. It was a great experience just to see them all again and spend time with them. On our first week there, we were on our way back to my aunt's house from a long day of shopping when the conversation in the car turned to supernatural occurrences. Our culture is heavy on religion and tradition, and we can be very superstitious at times. There are numerous stories of mythical monsters in Filipino culture, and hearing about them from my parents and relatives only furthered my interest. They included the Tikbalang, which was a monster that frequented the forests and the mountains. It is described as a large humanoid creature with the head and limbs of a horse. So, basically BoJack Horseman. The copper was more of a tale for kids. It's described as a tall troll-like creature that resides in large trees, where it smokes a cigar, waiting to scare off children that are out too late at night. He's usually regarded as non-violent though. Another one is a Tiyanak, and they're the stuff of nightmares. In remote areas near forests, you'd hear the faint crying of a baby. If you followed these sounds deep into the woods, it could lead you to being perpetually lost. Or if you were really unlucky, you'd find the source. You'd stumble upon what looks like a baby on the ground, but in actuality, it's a small, ghastly creature that will transform and eat you if you got too close. Then there's the aswang, a shapeshifter that feeds on human flesh at night. A specific species of them, called a mananagal, which translates literally to remover, is a particularly terrifying one. By day they are in the form of a regular woman, but by night they feed. They root their legs to the ground as their top half detaches itself, sprouts bat-like wings, and takes flight. They mainly target pregnant women, and they have long vine-like tongues that slither down and eat the fetus as they hover right outside the window. I know, pretty crazy stuff, right? I've always regarded these tales with a healthy amount of salt and a full dose of fear. They were cool and unique, but I could happily live the rest of my life not encountering any of them if they were indeed real. Even when I moved to America, I was still wary of those regional creatures. Anyways, during the car ride, my cousin spoke of strange sightings and experiences they've had, all with varying degrees of believability and silliness. My dad relayed some tales from his younger years about how his group of friends would encounter this and that. He was always ever so dramatic with his storytelling. It was all in good fun, but throughout the whole conversation, my mom remained quiet. She was the hard skeptic type and would always dismiss those stories as silly folklore. However, at that moment, it looked like she had something to say. My curiosity took over, and I finally asked her if she had any ghostly encounters. She looked at me and nodded. Back during her college years, when she was studying to be a nurse, she lived on the campus of a very old school, not too far from the city I was born in. Living conditions were pretty rough, and 4 of them had to share a room half the size of a normal American college dorm. On top of that, the campus used to be an infirmary during World War II. Hundreds of soldiers from both sides passed through and died within the walls of that hospital. Residents of the dorms would speak of strange noises in the night. Footsteps, faint echoes, and knocking were heard in certain parts of the building. There were rumors that the place was also a temporary orphanage at one point in time, and that a handful of children had died there. They said you could hear children's laughter in the walls if you listened closely. On more than one occasion, my mom and her roommates would wake up to faint shuffling noises in the room, like someone small was moving about. When they looked around, they wouldn't see anyone, so they dismissed it and went back to sleep. It wouldn't be until the following morning that they saw what looked like footprints on the walls and ceiling. They were the size of a child's. One of her roommates moved out after that. One night, a close friend of my mom was heading back to her room after a late study session. She was wary of the supernatural, so she kept her head down and walked quickly through the halls. As she passed by one of the empty rooms, something caught her eye. That large room used to be a triage area when the place was still a hospital. The old rusted beds were left there abandoned, and the room was used for storage. She said she saw half a dozen men lying on the beds. They looked injured and bandaged, and they wore what looked like the uniform of an American soldier from World War II. She stood frozen in place as she felt the coldest chill she'd ever experienced in her life. Then one of the soldiers sat straight up and slowly turned towards her. That was enough to snap her back to her senses, and she took off running towards her room. When she got to her dorm and told her friends what she saw, the brave ones of the group headed to the room to investigate. When they got there, the beds were empty. Ever the skeptic, my mom didn't put much stock in those stories. That is until one early morning, when she experienced something that challenged her stance and bothers her to this day. In the mornings before classes, my mom would wake up extra early, so she can get first dibs on the showers in the community bathrooms. It wasn't too hard, since a lot of the residents had convinced themselves that the place really was haunted, and were unwilling to venture out on their own that early. My mom mostly ignored those stories, and she always got to class early. That morning she did her usual routine, and it went off without a hitch. As she was walking back to her room, she heard it. She said it sounded like whispers. She stopped and turned around. Down the hallway, a figure stood just at the edge of darkness. The lights weren't in the best condition in that wing, so it was dim. Still, my mom could discern that the figure was dressed like a nun. That didn't make any sense, since there were no nuns on campus, and the nearest church was several miles away. Staying completely calm, my mom turned and walked away. She quickened her pace, and her own footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She strained to hear any other noises, but heard none. When she turned right to another hallway, she saw the nun from the corner of her eye. It was closer, and definitely following her. As she got closer to her dorm, she turned around once more. The nun was at the end of the hall, just as far away from her when she first saw it. The nun stood still, as if she'd been standing there the whole time. My mom quickly reached her door and struggled to unlock it. Daring one more look, she turned to her left, but the nun was gone. Relieved, she turned the lock. As she did, she moved to pick up her stuff and felt an unnaturally cold chill. She slowly looked right, and it was right there. The nun, on the other end of the hall. Except now she was much closer. and fully in the light. On instinct, my mom turned the knob and threw her door open. And that's when the child ran out. A small, kindergarten-aged child ran out of her dorm room, brushed past her leg, and ran towards the nun. The child was laughing innocently, as if playing a game of tag. My mom watched as the child ran past the nun and disappeared into another room. After a few moments, the nun turned and followed the child. My mom asked around after that experience and learned that the last time there were children or nuns in the campus was back when it was a temporary orphanage several years ago. They shut it down after a tragic fire killed a dozen children and a few nuns looking after them. She never experienced anything else out of the ordinary after that. After she told that story, we all sat stunned in our seats. Mom had been holding out on me. I was thrilled, but also terrified of what I'd just heard. See, at the time, I had a passive interest in the paranormal. It wasn't anything serious, and nowhere near obsession levels. I wasn't out to prove that the afterlife existed, nor was I determined to find out if ghosts and spirits were real, to find some sort of meaning in this chaotic world. Did I believe in the supernatural? Not really, but I'd be open to the possibility. My interest in the subject was purely recreational, like someone who enjoys horror movies or knitting sweaters. In fact, while I like reading up on urban legends and enjoy hearing ghost stories, I'm also terrified by them. My imagination, fueled by stuff I've read and scary movies I've watched, would always get the best of me when I'm alone in the dark. It was a sort of interesting paradox, kind of like how at one point in my childhood, I was fascinated by snakes as animals, but I was deathly afraid of encountering one out in the wild. To be honest, I was still a little bit jealous of my mom that she had such a cool story to tell. I wished at that moment I had my own story. Well, you know what they say about being careful what you wish for? Yeah. Later on in the trip, we visited my uncle who lived a few towns over. There, he lived with his family where he ran a very lucrative farming business. On the way there we passed a long bridge that went over a steep ravine with a river below. As our car rode along the bridge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. It made sense, since I'd traveled over this bridge many times before when I visited my uncle and cousins. However, underneath that feeling was a sense of unadulterated fear and dread, like something bad had happened here, and it somehow directly affected me. A distant memory, screaming to be remembered. As if on cue, my dad pointed out that this bridge was infamous to the surrounding towns and cities because of the White Lady. Now, like the Copper or the Tikbalang, the White Lady is another one of the ubiquitous ghost stories told all around the country. She is perhaps the most well-known, since different countries also have their own version. In America, she's usually called the Lady in White. In Spanish culture, she's La Llorona. The basic idea remains the same. A ghostly-looking woman dressed in a long white dress and long dark hair stands on the side of isolated roads, waiting to hitch a ride. The scenarios vary, but in the Philippines, if you stopped and gave her a ride, she would quietly enter your back seat. If you don't interact with her, she'll leave you alone until she disappears from your car some distance later. If you see her on the road and keep driving, she will suddenly appear in your car and attack you. Moral is, it's better to give her a ride than not. When we arrived at my uncle's large house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bridge had somehow directly affected me. After a delicious dinner and a round of video games with my cousins, I found my uncle out in the balcony having a drink. He offered me a beer since I was finally old enough, and I took a seat next to him. "Hey Tito, do you remember anything about that bridge right outside of town?" He put his drink down and regarded me for a few moments. He cut straight to the chase. "You were really young when it happened. I suppose you didn't remember it much." Now I was fully intrigued. I had to know. What exactly happened? His warm smile faded, and he told his tale. As the story went on, the memories began to flood my mind. Memories that I had long since repressed as a defense mechanism. All the details came to me in excruciating clarity, as if it happened just yesterday. By the time he had finished the story, there was no denying it. I had encountered a ghost all those years ago. It was the mid-90s, and I was still living in the Philippines. I was a plucky 6-year-old that was all about adventure and exploring. Once or twice a week, I would spend the night at my uncle's farm, back then a small budding business. The town it was in was smaller then, and fairly remote. I loved that place because there was so many areas to explore, but only in the daytime. One particular night I was over at his place, just watching TV. My uncle got a call of a new delivery of chicken feed that needed to be picked up in the next town. At the time, he only had a few farm hands, and they all had the night off. Usually he wouldn't make a supply run this late at night, but he was behind schedule and needed to pick up the supplies or risk losing profit. As he headed out, he asked me if I wanted to tag along. Ever the restless child, I immediately agreed. My uncle had an old Toyota SUV that he used for all his delivery pickups. I sat in the second row, my usual spot, while my uncle slid into the driver's seat. Most of the voyage was uneventful. It was nearly 11 p.m. at night, so there was hardly any other vehicles on the road. Upon crossing the bridge the first time, nothing happened. During that time the bridge was newly constructed. It was put up the year before after the original bridge was ravaged by the last typhoon. The city even put street lights on the new bridge for better visibility. That was a huge deal since none of the other surrounding roads had street lights. We arrived at the next town, and I helped my uncle load up the supplies. Well, at least as much as a small 6-year-old can. On the way back home was when it happened. I was sitting in the back seat, absent-mindedly looking out the window, when I felt the car slow down. We were almost at the bridge, and I noticed that something wasn't right. I was too small to see over the seat and out the windshield, but I could tell that all the lights on the bridge were off. At this point the car slowed to a crawl. "Hey sport, why don't you lie down and take a little nap?" my uncle said from the front. Something in his voice didn't sound right. It sounded like he was scared and was struggling to hide it. "No, that's okay. I'm not tired. Please, just do it for me, okay?" He sounded stern but measured. My uncle was usually an easygoing guy, so when he got serious, you should pay attention. "Okay," I said as I laid down on the seat sideways. I briefly saw my uncle's eyes in the rearview mirror. They showed unmistakable fear. I felt the familiar bump that signaled that we were on the bridge, then the car stopped. "Close your eyes, okay? No matter what, keep them closed." "Okay." I started to get scared. I didn't know what was happening or why I had to close my eyes. Regardless, I shut them tight. Then the strangest thing happened. My uncle started to sing. It was a traditional Filipino folk song, and I'd only heard it once before. About a year ago, my aunt and uncle got into a shouting match, as in a things were thrown across the room type of shouting match. I was at their house at the time, and my cousins and I stayed in their room, cowering and waiting for the storm to pass. An hour later, my uncle entered the room and apologized for the shouting. He then started singing that song to lull us to sleep. The melody was beautiful, and I'd never known my uncle could sing that well. He never did it again, at least not until that moment, when we were in that dark bridge. The song sounded just as beautiful, but I could tell his voice was shaking. His car wasn't that big, but I was a small child, and there was a lot of room in the second row. I was lying down on the seat perpendicular to the windows, trying and hoping for sleep to come. Instead, something else arrived. Click, click! I heard the familiar mechanism of the headlights flashing. All of a sudden I sensed that I wasn't alone in that second row anymore. My spatial awareness of the car told me that there was someone or something else sitting right next to me. We had gained another passenger. I shut my eyes even tighter as my uncle began to drive. The temperature inside the car became cold. I curled myself into a ball, seeking refuge from whatever it was that was now right next to me. I didn't know much about ghosts and supernatural creatures at that age, and though I couldn't see it, something told me that I was in the presence of something not of this world. My uncle finished the song and started over again. I was amazed that he was able to keep his composure. I refused to open my eyes. I could hear her, so uncomfortably close next to me. At first, I heard what sounded like clicking. As it increased in volume, it sounded like stalks of celery being twisted and broken. Crack, 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 crack. It was unnerving. Those sounds weren't normal. They were all around me. We finally crossed over the bridge, but she was still there. I was so scared I could barely move. The car hit a bump, which caused me to slide to the side, closer to her. I felt damp cloth against my leg. My breaths became shallow, and I started to cry. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I opened my eyes for a split second. In that split second, I saw her. A brief flash of white, with stringy damp hair on her head, blacker than night. She was turned away from me. I blinked the tears from my eyes. When I opened them again, the mass of black hair was now right in front of my face. I shut my eyes tight again. After what seemed like an eternity, the car hit a familiar curve on the road that signaled the entrance into our town. I felt that entity come even closer to me. By this time my uncle was silent. No more songs. The air became even colder right next to my face, and I shook, not from the cold but from terror. Then she spoke, right into my ear. It was a hushed whisper, lower than any whisper I've ever heard. I couldn't make out what she said. It didn't sound threatening or angry. It sounded sad. And then she was gone. I immediately felt the difference. I could no longer feel another presence in the car, and the air went from cold to tropical humid again. I heard my uncle breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't open my eyes until we had reached the safety of the farm. My uncle had to carry me back inside and straight into my bed, and only then did I open my eyes. From what I could recall, we never spoke of that night to anyone, not even each other, ever again. Subsequent trips across the bridge at night never resulted in another white lady sighting, at least not for me. I'd find out later that in the early 80s a woman was found dead at the bottom of that bridge. People said that she was traveling to the next town and was hoping to catch a ride with any passing vehicles. It was late at night, and she had no family nearby that could give her a ride. No one knows what really happened, but many suspected that it was murder. After my trip back to the Philippines, I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bridge. How could I forget such an incredible and terrifying experience? I guess it doesn't matter since I remember it now. But there was something else I realized about that night, something I hadn't remembered before. When I heard her whisper, I thought I only heard unintelligible garble. But that's not true. She did say something. She said "Maraming salamat." Translated to English, that means "thank you very much."